Today on GoldSheet TV, we're going to be talking about rookies and coaches. Now we have the NFL Hall of Fame game on tonight, and you might catch the show either before or after. And unfortunately, we're not going to be seeing any impact rookies probably playing tonight, but we have football here nonetheless. But again, welcome on into GoldSheet TV. I am your co-host, Eric Pauly, with my co-host, Dan Alexander at Newbie Talks on Twitter. And today we're discussing some more awards markets to get ready for the season. Quick reminder, liking this video and subscribing to the channel is the best way to help us grow, so we really appreciate that. And goldsheet.com, all three products are now one product. That early bird price is for sale, and the LTS picks are now on WagerTalk.com. Let's get right into it. We're starting with the offensive rookie of the year award, focusing just on these young guns. And looking at the market, you have Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons, no surprise, plus 275 chalk to win the award. Then you have the three QBs who were drafted in the first round: Bryce Young plus 500, Anthony Richardson plus 600, CJ Stroud plus 850, and Jahmyr Gibbs plus 1,000. Then rounding out that top five, the running back for the Lions, then followed by some wide receivers: Jackson Smith-Njigba plus 1,500, Jordan Addison plus 1,700, Quentin Johnson plus 2,200. We're going to focus in more on some of the chalk in this award because historically the chalk for this award ends up winning.
Yeah.
Bijan Robinson plus 275, I personally have no interest in. I want to look at the quarterbacks here, even though that this is an award that is mostly dominated by running backs. Like Bijan Robinson probably is going to win this award if we're being honest here. But the quarterbacks are very interesting. Newbie, between Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud, if you had to choose one of those three to win this award, who would you take a look at?
Yeah, and like you said, like this isn't like MVP where it has become a quarterback award. As a matter of fact, only 6 quarterbacks have won it since 2010. So this is a little bit more where you can go down the board and try and find some value at some different positions here. And as far as which quarterback I think has the best shot at winning the award, I just look at who really has the best potential situation. And when I'm looking at that, I want to look at strong head coaching and who's a guy who can always get the most out of his quarterbacks. That's Frank Reich. And I think the change with him going to Carolina only boosts what Bryce Young's potential could be. Now, I'm not crazy high on Bryce Young coming out and really showing out this season simply because there's a little bit of lack of playmakers, I would say, as far as it goes in the receiving core there in Carolina. But I think, solid coaching. It's not like Frank Reich's going to be making him go out there and be a world beater, and having a nice compliment in Miles Sanders. It's always good to at least have a steady hand in the backfield when you're looking to get some success out of a young quarterback. So who has the best chance at getting it? I don't think I would place a ticket on him, but I think Bryce Young's stepping into a pretty good, low risk situation for him. Sure, he's always going to have some marks around him because of where he was selected and how ballyhooed he was coming out of college. But I think he's at least stepping into a situation where he doesn't have to go in and be a world beater right away. And he's getting a guy who's played at a decently high level at the position and has really maximized quarterbacks, both young and old, in his time as a head coach and coordinator throughout the league. So it would be Bryce Young for me.
Yeah, and like you said, like you made a great point that this is not a quarterback-driven award. So in the last 25 years, 36% of Offensive Rookie of the Year winners have been quarterbacks, 40% running backs, and 24% wide receivers. So a pretty decent, pretty fair break there outside the tight ends, which we'll get to shortly. But when you include last year's winner, Garrett Wilson, 3 wide receivers have won this award since 2010. So not very many. Anquan Boldin in 2003 is the only wide receiver since 1976 to win this award outside of the first round. And outside of Dak Prescott in 2016, every Offensive Rookie of the Year at quarterback has been a top 11 draft pick. And at running back, many of the winners have come from outside of round 1. So if we're looking for like a longer shot outside of an early draft pick, you would probably want to take a look at the running backs. But the point of all these stats are that there is, arguments to be made for any offensive player that you really think is going to make a big impact. One of those guys, Newbie, that I know you circled is Jahmyr Gibbs, a top pick for the Detroit Lions. He was drafted, 12th overall? And based on the statistics, running backs overall generally are drafted outside the first round, have a better chance. But this year, we've seen the 2 running backs go in the first round, Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, because those 2 teams also think that these guys are more of weapons than just straight running backs. But talk to me. What about Jahmyr Gibbs attracts you to looking at his plus 1,100 price and saying, maybe you want to add this to your offensive rookie of the year portfolio?
Yeah, I think it could just come down to usage. And I think when it comes to being around the goal line, maybe his size will hurt him and he'll secede some carries to David Montgomery. But as far as it goes to quickness, to hands, this is a guy who can make an impact coming out of the backfield. And having a receiving running back with the potential and talent that Jahmyr Gibbs has and what he showed off at his time in Alabama, what we saw, 4.36 40-yard dash. He's quick as well as fast. And because he's a little bit more diminutive, only at 5'9", 199, so I'd like to see him get a little bit more size. He still has shown an ability to be a little bit shifty in his time at Alabama. Tackle breaking, elusiveness, his yards after carry numbers at Alabama is really what got me excited about him coming into this situation. And this Detroit Lions team, look at what they were able to do with Williams and with DeAndre Swift, like guys who were constantly injured. They still were putting up decent numbers, and maybe not, rookie of the year numbers, definitely not player of the year numbers, but numbers nevertheless. And I think, having some tread on the tires and pairing up in a backfield that scored a league high 501 fantasy points in 2023, that's where I look at, yardage and scores and things like that. And I know fantasy is kind of taking a back seat, but where there's production, there's fire and there's excitement. And I think behind this offensive line, Gibbs definitely has value from a prop perspective, from a daily fantasy perspective. And if he meets that value or exceeds it, I think he should be up there with some of these other names. And at plus 110, you kind of see, at plus 1,100, you kind of see excitement around the odds makers as well, saying Gibbs is a guy to not be slept on. And I think, there could be some decent production there. If the Lions have the season that they have, he becomes a little bit trendy of a pick. So I think just heading into the season, I think the odds are that this number is going to get shorter than it is going to be longer. And that's what I'm looking for when I'm placing futures like this. So that's why I like Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, no, it's easy to see why you like him. The offensive line really is great. The fact that they have David Montgomery, Jared Goff is a quarterback who, really relies on not getting pressured, and you have two nice outlets to complement, of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown and some of the other weapons that the Lions do have offensively. So I can certainly see that. But coming into this award, like we mentioned, it really probably is going to be a race between Robinson, Gibbs, or any of the three quarterbacks. Now you do have first-round wide receivers such as Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, and Zay Flowers, who I would all probably consider outside of Addison and Smith-Njigba. Smith-Njigba was, in my opinion, the most talented wide receiver in this class, but you have a guy now playing with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I don't know if the overall production is going to be there for him. Johnston, I kind of like because Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are, prone to being banged up. But in the same breath, he is coming in as wide receiver 3. And in the perfect situation for the Chargers, he stays wide receiver 3 because that means their two studs are still being studs. Zay Flowers, I like his potential. We'll see. But there are two guys a little bit down the board that I want to mention. One is Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah.
He is a top-tier athlete coming out of SMU. And obviously, anytime you're playing with Patrick Mahomes, especially now that they don't have anything really, concrete on the outside besides Travis Kelce, we know that doesn't phase Mahomes in this passing offense. Rice has the ability to come in and potentially make some moves. But another player I'm eyeing as somewhat of a long shot is Marvin Mims for the Denver Broncos. Now, again, we're talking about 100 to 1, so I'm not going to be, it's something I add to the portfolio, but it's not something that I'm expecting to really cash. It's something I'd be willing to sprinkle on. Similar situation to Johnston and Jigba, where he has two bona fide wide receivers in front of him on the depth chart, but he is wide receiver 3, and he is the first pick of the Sean Payton era in Denver. And Payton actually traded up in the draft to go and get this guy. So they clearly have high hopes for him. And now that Tim Patrick unfortunately suffered an injury and KJ Hamler looks like he is going to continue his unfortunate string of injuries, Mims could walk in and be that wide receiver 3 right away. We know Sutton and Judy both have had some injury problems. So give me 100 to 1 on a guy with immense amounts of talent that, again, is clearly beloved by the coaching staff. Now we know it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to end up being, great by any means, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be worth a sprinkle there. Newbie, any thoughts on my thoughts on Mr. Marvin Mims or any of those other wide receivers before we get to another dark horse you like?
Yeah, and the dark horse who all bringing up, it's more a little bit laughable of the number that we're seeing on Dalton Kincaid, the tight end coming out of Utah here for the Buffalo Bills. But the only worry that I have with Rice is the same preseason hype that we saw about Sky Moore last year. People excited about him. Oh, he's going to have Patrick Mahomes. So I always just worry about that receiving core. And Patrick Mahomes has come out and said, it's going to all go through Kelsey. And then if we get, production from other guys, great. So I understand the hype around him. And I think there's no way that he'll have as bad of a rookie year as Sky Moore had. I will definitely secede that. And then the only other thing with Marvin Mims is I am so unenthused about the wide receiver core for the Denver Broncos. And I think part of that has to do with how horrible Russell Wilson looked last year. But as far as it goes of guys in that receiving core, I think Mims is definitely the one that you have the most excitement about, for sure. I think that that's fair. I think that there's definitely something there. However, it would take quite the turnaround, and we talked about that when we were previewing the AFC West. Can you have this turnaround now that Sean Payton is there? Can Russell Wilson return to form? I lean more towards no, which would give me pause on Mims, but I understand the rationale behind both of them. I just it's two situations that I feel like I'm not as excited about, and I want to feel good about a situation when I'm placing my money for the books to hold on to for a couple months. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. No, it definitely makes sense. But Dalton Kincaid, right?
Ugh.
When not gonna say it came out of nowhere, but there were some other tight ends who were rated higher pre-draft process than Kincaid, who then ended up, going to Buffalo, which could be a perfect situation. Tight end that's never won this award, but you have any hopes for Kincaid this season?
Now, I just think it's funny that, when we were running down, what are the numbers? What is the percentage breakdown of positions that ended up winning this award? A tight end was 0.0%. Never been done before, yet the number's 45-1. You talked about a sprinkle on 100-1. Dalton Kincaid should be 200-1. Like, there's no way that Dalton Kincaid ends up winning this award unless he puts up Kelsey level numbers in his rookie year. So I just think it's funny to see this number. And I think the reason we see this subpar number is how much preseason hype that this guy is getting. You know what I mean? So definitely there's people who are placing on this award, or odds makers are protecting themselves in the back door. I don't think he ends up winning it, but Josh Allen is really, gassing this guy up. Is it just camp talk because he wants to get, the guy excited, get him touches? I think it has more to do with the fact that this guy will be impactful for this Buffalo offense, and adding a dynamic piece that they can now go in 12 personnel. And I expect to see them in 12 personnel this season more than they ever with two tight ends on the field. And I think the looks are going to go more towards Kincaid than they are going to go toward Dawson Knox. And from a fantasy perspective, when you were playing teams that struggled against tight ends, or just a prop perspective as well, when you were playing teams who were struggling against tight ends, Dalton Knox anytime touchdown scorer was always a decent look, and it was always some nice plus money. I think Kincaid is going to be that player that, especially early on in the year, you're going to get some 3-1, some 2.5-1s on Kincaid to maybe get into the end zone. I think his reception overs are going to be nice, because this is a guy who a lot of the hype that came around him was because it was 70 receptions, 890 yards, 8 touchdowns in just 12 games in his 2022 campaign. And I think he has to come along as a blocker a little bit. They didn't ask him to do that as much at Utah, but maybe they won't if they're in 12 personnel and you just have him doing a little bit more of a chip and working across that middle. I think he has some major upside. And I just wanted to mention that you're going to have some value in Kincaid in the prop market. I just think it's kind of funny, and it shows that the odds makers too are pretty excited about this guy's potential at only 45-1 at a position that has probably little to no shot winning this award. So if there was a 100-1, okay, I would come on here and make the case for Dalton Kincaid. I just didn't want him to go under the radar, because this is a guy, once you and I start getting into weekly plays, when you see me greasing the wheels of Kincaid, I didn't want it to come as some surprise. I think there's going to be some money to be made on that tight end coming out of Utah.
Yeah, he was one that, like most draft pundits, sometimes obviously talking heads, but like that was one that was pointed out as like a perfect match, Dalton Kincaid to the Buffalo Bills. So that is something to certainly be excited for. But let's shift on over to the Defensive Rookie of the Year market. Going to run through some of the favorites for starters. Will Anderson Jr., edge to the Texans, plus 400. Odds from DraftKings Sportsbook, and of course, Line Shop whenever you're looking to place a bet. Jalen Carter, defensive tackle, plus 700. Christian Gonzalez, cornerback, plus 950. Tyree Wilson, edge for the Raiders, plus 1,000. You got Devon Witherspoon, Jack Campbell, Lucas Van Ness, Emmanuel Forbes, Nolan Smith, rounding out the top 10 there. And some interesting nuggets from the Defensive Rookie of the Year. So since 1995, 43% of Defensive Rookie of the Year winners have come from edge rushers, 11% from defensive tackles, 32% from linebackers, and 14% from cornerbacks. But since 2010, the dispersion has been much more equitable between defensive positions. Interesting, every edge rusher also from 95 to win this award have come from the top 16 of round one. And all 28 Defensive Rookie of the Year winners since 1995 have come from inside the top 40 of the draft overall, with 25 in the first round. So this market basically is focused on the pedigree. I'm not saying that that's because the voters are looking at draft position, but you have higher picks. You would expect those players to be better. And in the Defensive Rookie of the Year market, while recently now you have, Sauce Gardner winning last year, who broke a little bit of a drop for cornerbacks. You've had, Aaron Donald, Dominic Sue, Sheldon Richardson winning this award recently. So now is a time where, the best Rookie of the Year defensively is winning. It's not really a positional, they're not, if Tyree Wilson, has more sacks, but, somebody else and the cornerback has a better season, he still might get the nod there. It's not going to be focused on edges. We got a couple of guys we're staring at. There is somebody I love. I placed a bet on yesterday to win this award, and that is Christian Gonzalez, cornerback for the New England Patriots. Now, I was on Sauce Gardner last year. That was a big hit for me. I'm using a similar just kind of mindset for this one. So going down from the chalk, Will Anderson, I think, is a little bit overrated of a player, and the Texans don't have a good enough line around him to support him, and he'll probably get most of the attention on the defensive line, so his production probably won't be as great. Jalen Carter, same thing, absolute animal. The Eagles have animals all over the place. He might not be everywhere. It might be hard for them to kind of focus on him. Tyree Wilson, I don't even think is a good player, so we'll scratch him. Devon Witherspoon is probably great, so that'll be his, competition. But we've seen what Bill Belichick does with their cornerbacks. We've seen so many players, Stephon Gilmore, J.C. Jackson, most recently, take these immense steps and become absolute lockdown cornerbacks, defensive player of the year caliber players. They've won those awards. And then when they go to other systems, they've never been as good as they were in New England. From an athletic standpoint, Gonzalez checks every single box that Belichick would love for a cornerback. And we know on draft night that when Belichick traded back and let the Steelers come up and get the tackle, Washington then took Emmanuel Forbes, who I actually do think is a good secondary option in this market. Belichick was smiling and waiting in the wings to draft this guy because he checked all the boxes he wanted. And this guy was expected to go in the top 10, and I'm not sure exactly why he fell, but he did, and now the Patriots are going to reap the rewards here. Just from a ball skill perspective, from a scheme perspective, a coaching perspective, an athletic profile perspective, and just a match made in heaven, if you ask me. So Christian Gonzalez, I got 12-1 on a reputable offshore, but I'm seeing a lot of 11-1s on most of the mainstream, sports books. I think that's a great bet, and that's something that I'm really in love with. I know you have a cornerback and a linebacker, newbie, that you're looking at. Talk to me. You want to discuss Will McDonald first, or you want to go Joey Porter?
The only other cornerback that I would look towards other than Gonzalez, I think, I have nothing more to add to the point. I think you nailed everything. I completely agree. I think he would be my favorite in the secondary to put a little sprinkle on. The other one is just a value play for me, and that's Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State. 33-1 is one of the prices that you're able to see. You might be able to vary that in the marketplace, but The one thing that I like about him when we talked about situations, right? He's joining a really nice, secondary where really they've been looking for some cornerback help because they do have some decent safety play over the top, more than decent safety play over the top. That's going to allow him to maybe take the training wheels off a little bit sooner, allow him to be aggressive, be confident because he knows he has something to help him out there on the back end. And then if you just look at the schedule that the Steelers are going to be facing this year, they play some quarterbacks who definitely have a tendency to turn the ball over. And Joey Porter, if you underthrow balls, he makes you pay for it. And he's able, to play some bump and run. And I think his athleticism is going to match up nicely against wide receivers that he'll face off. So at 33-1, he would be the only other play in the secondary that I would have other than that Gonzalez breakdown that you had for sure.
So another player that I would sprinkle on to build a little bit of a portfolio with Gonzalez, and I'm not going to say this is a homer pick because it isn't my Washington Commanders, but based on what I've been reading and seeing in training camp, he's been getting so much love, and I will be Emmanuel Forbes for Washington. And something that I just think that when you go to Marshawn Lattimore's rookie season, that really separated him from the pack, which actually wasn't the same thing last year because Tariq Woolen had more counting stats than Sauce Gardner, but obviously Sauce had the hype and also had a fantastic season with, more of a lockdown coverage. So that's why he ended up winning the award. But in Lattimore's year when he won, he had 5 interceptions, 18 passes defended that season. He also scored a touchdown. That's huge. Now we're talking about Emmanuel Forbes, who has led the SEC in interceptions as well as interception return for a touchdown, setting records in college. Washington's defensive front is one of the best in football, and they get pressure with 4 men. If Forbes is sitting in a zone, Washington's getting pressure up front. This guy is a proven ball hawk in college, so he could be somebody who starts adding up those counting stats where in a race, like I'm expecting this defensive rookie of the year race to be very close-knit because I don't think that there is one player who's truly ahead of the pack like Sauce was last year, that if we're talking from a counting stat perspective, Forbes is in a fantastic position to accumulate those counting stats because Washington will be getting pressure up front. Pressure is going to make opposing quarterbacks don't have to force throws. Emmanuel Forbes, throughout his collegiate career, has shown that he specializes in breaking up passes, intercepting passes, and then taking those interceptions to the crib. So another guy I like to consider. But you also, Newbie, are looking at a linebacker. He's an older linebacker, but he is going to a situation where he probably can make an impact right away. Talk to me about Will McDonald for the Jets.
Yeah, and you mentioned edge rushers and the potential that they have. At 22-1, Will McDonald with the Jets is exactly what they've been looking for, and that's an outside speed rushing specialist, and that's all he is. When he's finally free and allowed to pin his ears back, this is where he can make the most impact. You saw it at Iowa State, and the only concern that I have is you saw him in a lot of 3-man fronts during his time at Iowa State, but still, even with that, even with not having 2 defensive tackles to shore him up, he still had a stellar career for the Cyclones. So now he's going to be paired with Robert Saleh, defensive-minded head coach who, what does he want to do? He wants to allow his edge rushers to pin their ears back. And he's joining, a decent situation there as well. And he's a guy who's going to be able to play on the right or left tackle so they can pair him up nicely with wherever they see him potentially having a step. And he's big, man, 6'4", 240 pounds. However, it's not like he has the typical width that you maybe like to see out of a pass blocker or out of a pass rusher, but he's a kind of guy who's probably going to be able to bend and spill because of that tighter frame that he has. And the Jets have just been in dire need of getting some final pressure off of the edges. So I think they're going to give him a lot of rope to potentially put his stamp on this defense. Now, do I think he's going to have Nick Bosa rookie type season? No, but I think he already is going to be on a team that's going to be featured on Hard Knocks, that's going to have a hype man in it in Sauce Gardner, that's going to have a lot of national attention around it already. And so much of what I look for in these type of awards is narrative, is excitement, is exposure, and just being on the team that's going to be on Hard Knocks, he could become a fan favorite right out of the gate. So I think at 22-1, a guy who's going to be nationally featured, I think this number, again, going back to what I look for when trying to play in some of these markets, is numbers that are more likely to get shorter than they're likely to get longer. And I think 22-1 is going to be the best price around that you're going to be able to get on Will McDonald IV. So I'd rather grab it now than later with a guy who could potentially be a sack leader for rookies, or at least around the sack leader for rookies off the edge for the Jets.
Yeah, my devil's advocate for that would be is that, you're coming onto a team already that has Quinn Williams, who's an absolute animal, then obviously Sauce Gardner.
Yep.
So while Will McDonald can certainly make an impact, it's not like he's ever going to be even a top 3. At best, he could be the 3rd best player on this defense, which might be tough for him moving forward. But overall, though, I do agree that his presence that he can bring could certainly be huge for the Jets. But now I'm moving on to Coach of the Year. Now, this is one of the more interesting markets because there's no market that's driven more by bias than any other market. Now, there are so many factors that are major in this award, and this is an award where, like, looking at the chalk for like Defensive Rookie of the Year and Offensive Rookie of the Year, the chalk is probably what's going to win. Coach of the Year is just always priced poorly, and there actually is pretty reliable filters that you can use historically, like kind of a criteria of sorts that I discussed a couple shows ago, but obviously it's topical now. So 14 straight winners of this award have been on a team with at least 9 wins. The average preseason win total of the last 15 winners is just over 7 wins. No winner in the last 15 years came into the season with a win total of greater than 9.5. So a team that's really expected to be playoff caliber is actually already a negative. Like if you're going to be, obviously Andy Reid, for example, has the worst odds to win this award because if the Chiefs go from 11 wins to 13 wins or vice versa, 13 to 14, it's not moving any needles. And also the number of wins increased by an average of 6 from the year prior. So this is an award solely focused on a team that the market hates in the first place, the media thinks is going to be poor and bad the entire time, that then they end up doing well. And as we know in the NFL over the last 10 years, an average of 5.8 teams have made the playoffs the following season after not making the playoffs the season before. So that already kind of shrinks the pool very quickly. There are some guys that fit that potentially fit that criteria to a T. One of those guys is Matt LaFleur. You like him. Talk to me why you're so high on him outside of the criteria.
Yeah, and if you just look at, some of the top names that are on that list, sure, maybe this one seems a little bit square, but you're able to shop around, find it around a 15-1 on Matt LaFleur. And, I think this comes down to a potential. You mentioned, if you have high expectations coming into the year, you're already behind the 8 ball for winning this award. The funny thing is you don't really ever hear Matt LaFleur talked about being one of the top flight coaches in the NFL. And I think a lot of that had to do with what you saw with Aaron Rodgers. Everyone figured, well, it couldn't be LaFleur. It has to be Aaron Rodgers. But despite winning 13 games during each of his first 3 seasons at Packers head coach, he's never even received a nod. He's never even, been talked about in postseason recognition for this Coach of the Year award. And again, I think it's because he succeeded a lot of that to Aaron Rodgers. However, now heading into the year, you're looking at a potential, low expectation with high potential. And that's why I really like LaFleur as a Coach of the Year look, because it's a young roster. Unlike 2019, there were no big free agent additions, to spark a revival. It's all going to be about LaFleur's ability to maximize young talent. And also, what does Jordan Love look like? If Jordan Love even looks serviceable to good, this ticket becomes live. And then how do we get the ticket home? If the Packers get a wild card spot, this guy's going to be in the top 3 of Coach of the Year. I think, that's undeniable. And if they do get that wild card spot, if they do get a playoff spot, maybe hell, they even win the division, then I think we're talking about a situation where this guy is in the driver's seat and he's not going to be competing if they end up winning this division and, taking down Dan Campbell. Because if you look at the difference, that's why I wanted to mention Dan Campbell, low expectations, high potential. Dan Campbell, favorite because expectations are sky high for this team, and the potential for a letdown is just as high. The opposite can be said
100%.
About what you're going to be seeing with the Packers. So do I think LaFleur is, a mastermind? Do I think he's Belichick? No, but I just think the situation really sets up nicely that all the Packers have to do is get a playoff spot in a weakened NFC, and you're going to have a live ticket here at 15-1 That's why this is a bet that I have in my portfolio. I don't really bet many futures. I love this one. I really like the value on Matt LaFleur to win Coach of the Year at 15-1.
As much as I want to disagree with you, like I can't. I might have to bet this just out of spite to myself because I am of the belief that Matt LaFleur is one of the worst coaches in the National Football League. I fully believe that those 13-3 seasons were all due to Aaron Rodgers and the team actually, having good draft picks. But most of the games that they lost, especially in playoff time when they needed to have those crunch victories, you can tell the frustration on Rodgers' face. And I don't think it's because, and he also didn't play great in those matchups either. But I would more so pin the overall issues the Packers had in overcoming those humps on their inability to have, the coaching. And you look at like Mike McCarthy, who now everybody is roasting for being a terrible coach, who at the time they were probably not even roasting him, even though, he only won one Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers. And not like LaFleur had as much time as McCarthy to win one, but he couldn't even get, deeper into the postseason with Aaron Rodgers. I think that says more about him than it did about Rodgers or the rest of the Packers roster, because they've had loaded rosters the past couple of years. But with that being said, it makes way too much sense, right? Like we've seen crappy coaches win this award because, like we mentioned, Andy Reid, one of the best coaches in the NFL, plus 500. Bill Belichick, one of the best coaches in the NFL, 25-1. Mike Tomlin, one of the best coaches in the NFL, 25-1, right? So the award is not a best coach award. It is a most improved team award when everybody thought that they were going to stop. So with that distinction out of the way, LaFleur is 100% worth the wager. I'd love to say like no shot. The Packers are definitively going, 5-12 or whatever that case may be. But no, I am of the belief that the Packers have a chance to win a division title this season and make the playoffs. And if that is the case, the obvious correlation there is another Matt LaFleur Coach of the Year. So something that I would definitely look at for sure. But moving on to the last couple of guys that I don't really have to make really great cases on, Steichen and Frank Reich. Both of those guys I would like to look at for the award because their odds are a little bit crazy. You have Steichen at 25-1, Frank Reich at 22-1. And that just goes to basically the formula or the criteria I mentioned at the start of the show. Those guys fit that to a T. Panthers and Colts, both very low expectations coming off down years. Panthers not as much of a down year, but new coaches in new places have the ability now to, kind of strut their stuff and, pick up some wins above their projected win total. They make a playoff run. They're going to have their hats in the ring too. But one more coach I wanted to mention, like as an absolute complete long shot, would be Pete Carroll of the Seahawks, 30-1. Again, one of the best coaches in the NFL. Seahawks won the award last year. So this is, again, like it's hard to advocate for because the criteria is pretty set in stone. But if I had to, make another case, and that would be because the 49ers, while on paper absolutely loaded, they're playing a much harder schedule than they had to do last year. And they don't even know who their quarterback is. You can have Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, but, yes, you don't really need much from your quarterback to be good or for that team to be, an above average team. But they don't even know who is starting for week one, which I think is just, you can't ignore that. The Seahawks, I think, have a very wide range of outcomes. I think they could either be like a 6-win team because Geno Smith regresses, and obviously that would not lead to Cal winning this award. But this team also got better in the offseason. Across the whole team, they have a very good young offensive line. They have great weapons. They have a good defense. So they added 2 great players too. Added Devon Witherspoon, which is a great draft pick, and they added some great additions this offseason as well. If the Seahawks go, even though they were a 9-win team last year, go to like a 12-win team, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibilities, I think Carroll might have some slight consideration because everybody was, kind of saying, let Russ cook. It was all Carroll. Now last year they proved that, it wasn't all Pete Carroll. Russell didn't cook because he couldn't cook as well anymore. And then boom, Geno came in, and now if they do even better this year and actually, come close to that 1 seed in the NFC, Pete Carroll might be in consideration. Am I tripping there, newbie, or is there a little bit of merit there?
No, and I think too, again, if Pete Carroll, who's been in the league here for a while, and it's a potential for kind of the NFL to tip their cap a little bit, the AP and the NFL to say, hey, more of a career award. Sometimes you see that across different sports. No, I think that could potentially be a live ticket. And then in the case of Steichen, in the case of Frank Reich, it all comes down to how the quarterback performs, right? If Richardson has a great season, if Bryce Young has a great season, both of those tickets are live. And I think also expectations low for both of them. So I'm with you, man. I think this whole slate of Coach of the Year is all about buying low. And I think all four names that we listed here are all really nice buy low positions, as opposed to, everybody and their grandmother falling in love with Dan Campbell. I get it, but there are so many ways a situation like that can go wrong. Whereas these guys, they're already, kind of being written off. So you're going to have more value potentially on these tickets than just eating some chalk and saying, oh my God, wasn't Hard Knocks so much fun last year? The Lions are live. They're going to, even if the Lions make the playoffs, I don't know if that's as sure of a thing for Dan Campbell getting Coach of the Year as it is for any of these guys if their team ends up making the playoffs, especially if you see a nice output from Seattle. I could definitely see a tip of the cap for Pete Carroll on not his way out. I expect him to be coaching a while, but a guy who maybe is overdue for a public award like that for sure.
Never won the award, despite being one of the best head coaches in the NFL,
which is crazy
in his tenure. And the last point on this market, though, is this market was never right. If you have offensive rookie of the year, the odds, defensive rookie of the year, like Sauce Gardner was minus 1,200 by the time the season was ending, right? That you couldn't get in. The odds for the final three contestants, because they break it down to final three contestants, were still so high last year for Coach of the Year. So this is an award market where there is value to be gotten in all season long. Like we mentioned on some of the offensive and defensive rookie of the year awards, you probably got to get in some cases sooner than later, because you obviously want to target the odds who are going to get shorter, not longer. But you can manipulate it a little bit, but only to a certain extent. In this award, you could still be, finding value on a guy who has a real chance week 13, 14, 15, 16, where that's probably not the case for the other two awards markets. So definitely something to consider down the stretch. But another great episode of discussing football. Newbie and I will be doing this all season long. With that being said, though, next week I'm out of commission, but Newbie will be with Matt Joseph discussing some CFB, because obviously that's on the horizon, and we did not forget about college football. How could you forget about college football? Just as big in the NFL, depending where you are. But really appreciate you guys tuning into the show. Again, you can find Dan on Twitter at Newbie Talks, myself at Slime Action. Liking the video again and subscribing to the channel is the best way to help us grow. And we appreciate you guys. Lock in those tickets, and we'll see you guys next week.